everybody! Welcome to a brand new detailed diatribe that I'm definitely not recording 1 week before this goes up for scheduling reasons.
Yeah, you see, I was doing fine until I went to VidCon, and that kind of massively threw off not only the schedule for the week where I was at VidCon, but the week after I was at VidCon.
Yeah.
No thoughts were processed this whole week.
No.
So, you know.
This is a well-known side effect of recovering from conventions. Like, even if you don't get physically ill, which was a well-known con thing even before, the dark times, you still need time to psychologically recover from just that much stuff, the travel logistics, the meeting new people, all that good stuff. And like,
yeah, I didn't build that in.
No, you're kind of new to going to conventions. It's totally respectable. I should have warned you more. I'm so excited to get back into the con circuit because there's something very cleansing about being that wiped out for like a week straight just from how much fun you have. But anyway, because of that and because I insisted, we are doing a quick little detailed diatribe about a subject that I think is very interesting to explore, and that is Superman and the satirization thereof, because, well, Superman, he's a pretty interesting character, but it feels like half the people I see who are telling Superman stories are people who think Superman is dumb and boring, and I must ask, why are they doing this? So, without further ado, let's get into my sweet little PowerPoint about this.
Yeah, Superman is I'm sure you'll get into this, but he's such a complicated character to work with because he is such he's not a blank slate, but he's such like an open realm of possibilities that it's like, what direction do I go in? Where with some characters we're like, their backstory is very prescribed, their personality is very prescribed. It's like, okay, I know what to do with them, but with Superman, the possibilities are so numerous that it gets tricky to write him well.
Superman is indeed a complicated figure who is deceptively simple. But to start off, let's discuss who Superman is. I feel like...
Clark Kent, end of PowerPoint.
Oh, what? Nobody tell Lois.
The reporter?
I feel like this is an important thing to discuss, even though it is also a wildly unnecessary thing to discuss. Everyone in the world has heard of Superman, but we should cover our bases, cover our ground. Superman was created in the 30s by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster. They got on great, seems like. I did a little reading on this earlier in the day. This is by far the least important part of Superman's character, but it is important to note that he came from a place of science fiction, action, and adventure. He is a very sci-fi character, right down to his bones. He was also the first costumed superhero of this kind. He debuted in Action Comics #1. Action Comics ran for like 800 plus issues all the way up to now, basically. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's insane.
Yes. Page 1 of Action Comics #1 lays out Superman's origin in broad strokes. The planet isn't named. The scientist who his father is not named. A lot of his powers are rather more low than they are now. Ma and Pa Kent are never mentioned. He's just raised in an orphanage.
Page 1, Martha.
Yeah. Why'd you say that name? A scientist saves his baby son from the destruction of their planet, sends him to Earth Moses style. It's referenced on the slide I didn't mention. Both Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were Jewish. Siegel, I believe, both of his parents were immigrants to the U.S. from the rapid anti-Semitism rise in Europe around 1900. These men lived through 2 world wars, or at least one each, so that is important context that I think it's easy to overlook, especially because modern adaptations frequently lean into the Christ allegory angle, and I think it's better to acknowledge that it's just straight up Moses and the bulrushes and everybody knows it. So, in the original pseudoscientific explanation, Superman's, Clark Kent's great strength and power was from his advanced physical structure because the planet he was from had more evolution in it. I mean, it was 1938. We can forgive them for the pseudoscience.
He drank so much milk.
He did so many push-ups and sit-ups. So he has super strength. He nothing less than a bursting shell can break his skin. And he's super fast, and he can leap tall buildings an eighth of a mile in a single bound, and he chooses on page 1 to turn his titanic strength into channels that would benefit mankind. And that's his deal. That's Superman right down to his bones. Mild-mannered guy, weird powers, from space, stranger in a strange land, decides to use his powers to help people. And then they have a scientific explanation of Clark Kent's amazing strength that explains that it's like grasshoppers, you see? You know how they can jump? It's like that. So, peak stuff. Now, Superman's core deal can be boiled down to just a few core principles, and these remain relatively constant, although we'll get to the difficulties of establishing canon for superheroes in a minute. He's an alien from a destroyed world. He's basically the last of his kind, give or take a few. He's super strong, bulletproof, fast, grab bag of superpowers. He got a lot more during random periods of comics, and some of them stuck. He's dedicated to using his powers to help humanity. This is the one thing he does. He maintains a meek secret identity that contrasts with his brash superheroics. Pretty much the only thing that happens in Action Comics 1 is that Clark Kent asks Lois Lane out, and then, she gets menaced, and Clark kind of backs off, and I believe Superman swoops into the rescue, and she's like, oh, why can't you be more like that bold Superman, Clark? You're such a loser. He's a good-hearted, heroic, and selfless, but it is not yet clear at this point whether the true persona is the meek Clark Kent, or the bold and frequently mischievous Superman.
Contrast with Batman, who wears Bruce Wayne as a mask. I think it's interesting that from a very early stage of superhero comics, I know there were, costumed people before this, but, the Phantom was a guy. He wasn't a superhero, he was a guy in a costume. But, the idea that even starting with, Action Comics 1, the conflict between the identity and the superhero, that already that's a very important part of this character. It's cool to see that it's such a fundamental aspect. Krypton came later.
Yep.
All the other nonsense came later, but there are some parts that were truly fundamental to his character and showed up so early on.
Yes, and one thing I thought was interesting about his appearance in the very first Action Comics #1 is that one of the first bits of heroics we see is basically him using the fact that he's super strong, fast, and bulletproof to essentially break into a governor's house in the middle of the night to say, hey, someone's on death row, I have proof of her innocence, you have to save her right now, we don't have time for any of this. And it's this is some random lady. She's never brought up before, she's never brought up again, she's nobody Superman particularly knows or cares about. She's a random, innocent person who he saves with his powers in a simple way that nobody else could. He's not saving her from falling off a building, he's not stopping a train from hitting her, but in the same way that those events do happen, he is using his powers to basically say, look, we don't have time for this, you can save her, you have to, let's do it. And I just thought that was a very interesting and promising thing to be established so early, because, as we will discuss, this universal goodness, that there is nobody below Superman's notice, is very important to his character.
Yeah, that is huge.
Yes.
Other interpretations will surely talk about this. Into Superman's good because he punches things harder. No, he gives a shit.
Yeah.
That's half of his power set is the fact that he cares.
Yeah. Now we must address the elephant in the room whenever we discuss any form of superhero. What is the canon? As anyone familiar with the website Super Dickery will tell you, Superman had some pretty bad showings back in the day and also now. We can't make any statements like Superman does not kill or Superman is always a paragon of justice, because there's probably some Silver Age comic where he was I think this week I'll fuck with Lois Lane for no reason. It's boy, I think I'll throw this bad guy into the sun. It's all right, stop that. So, there's no concrete canon. We can't make any statements about this is always true or this is never true. His powers, personality, and general vibe have all fluctuated over time. How can we pin down the core of a character if they've changed so much over 8 decades of existing? How do we handle this? And then the answer is, we sort of cheat. We can sort of establish just the vibes of Superman and then work from there, because, any hardline statement we make can be proven or disproven 100 times over.
Yeah.
So let's go with the vibes. Superman's general...
It's a Venn diagram. We narrow in on it.
It's like if you take a Venn diagram, but then you fuzz out the edges into a gradient. The center is the stuff that's almost always true, and the edges, the more fringe stuff, that's more...
I guess it's more like a Gaussian distribution then.
Yeah, exactly. So Superman's general vibe was first iconically summed up in a 1942 radio show when they declared that it was truth, justice, and the American way.
Keep in mind, height of World War II.
Height of World War II. American superheroes got involved in World War II before the American Army did. So, a lot of stuff going on there. Superman is an archetypical hero. He fights for truth and justice. He saves innocent lives. He stops bad guys. It's real simple. What's his motivation? The goodness of his heart. He wants to use his powers to help people. He's not complicated. Doesn't have a Batman-style tragic backstory motivating him. Doesn't have any of that stuff. Like you said early, he's very simple. Superman is a simple meal well made. In addition, this is important to touch on, but it is not exactly core to his characterization, Superman generally does not kill. Some writers see this as very vital to his characterization, others kind of leave it alone and gloss it over. Superman is less likely than Batman to get really hung up on one of his bad guys just sort of dying anyway. Batman kind of takes that stuff personally, but Superman will be like, what a tragedy that in his final moments, Microwave Man chose to battle me. This is a real thing that happened. Anyway, so this is a simple core. You can introduce more complexities without disrupting that core. There are several questions you can ask. What does Clark think of himself in relation to humanity? Is he a god among men? Is he crushingly alone in a world that on some level can never truly understand him? Does he think of himself as basically human? These are all things that can be explored. What does Clark truly want? Does he want a simple life? Does he want to save the world and make it a better place? Does he want to inspire hope? Lots of things you can do there. What even is the American way? That's a whole can of worms we're not going to get into tonight. How does Superman's presence change the world? How does it reshape it? Does he inspire? Do people rely on him too much? Are people grateful for what he does, or are they presuming too much of him? Do they take him for granted? And what standards does Superman hold himself to, and why? This touches on the sometimes Superman doesn't kill thing, but, sometimes he doesn't. Does he, how does he hold himself accountable? To what levels does he do so, and why? These are all things that you can unpack in 100 different ways without in any way subverting the core tenets of Superman's personality, that he's here for truth and justice, baby. That's how he rolls.
Red, I don't want to jump ahead too far. Will you touch on the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons at all?
Oh, I will not. So, but I know that you watched a bunch of those, so if you want to weigh in.
I'll briefly mention, because with actually Austin, DM of Rolling with Difficulty,
we
sat through and watched all of the 1941, 1942 Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, and it is really interesting to see, comics were introduced 1938 and the canon wasn't really set then, but there is so much of Superman that was kind of codified after the first run of comics, but is already in focus at the point of 1941-42 when those animations were going on. He's still very simple.
Yeah.
A lot of him isn't there yet. He works with Lois. He's a reporter at the
Daily Planet.
The day it was the Golden Globes.
The Bugle? No, that's
the Daily Bugle. Yeah. Get me pictures of Superman. No. But his power set has not been upgraded yet. He weirdly goes to fight both the Nazis and the Japanese in various episodes. So the war element is there in a really odd way that I'm not going to get into right now. But it is cool to see that as kind of an early moment where his character is kind of summed up in one place, because the comics are kind of they're wibbly wobbly, they kind of spill out in weird directions.
Oh yeah.
But the show is the first place where it's a solid self-contained thing where even casual observers would be like, oh, Superman.
Yeah,
I get it. Whereas the comics were fairly niche, and only in the past 2 decades have stopped being that. So
even then,
it's interesting.
I mean, let's be real.
It's a good example.
The comic side of things is still quite niche. Most people get it through movies or cartoons.
Fair.
Yeah.
But still absolutely worth a watch if you are interested in the character or in the early history of comics or cartoons.
Yeah.
It's genuinely fascinating to unpack what works and a lot of what doesn't. A lot of it is a little bit yikes, super, this is in the middle of World War I or World War II. Okay.
Almost.
Yeah. I see it.
Yeah.
I see it. But so
I'm excited.
All I'll say on that is
I'm going to need to look some of it up to cut in a little footage, so it'll be exciting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, as we're continuing this discussion of what makes Superman tick, I wanted to highlight 3 stories about Superman that I thought are really, really good and revelatory for different reasons. And we'll get into the specifics of these in following slides, one at a time. The first one, For the Man Who Has Everything, Alan Moore, adapted into an episode of the Justice League cartoon that is the only adaptation of an Alan Moore work that Alan Moore himself has said he likes.
Oh, wow.
Superman versus the Elite, which is an adaptation of Action Comics number 775. I told you it ran long. Called What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. Both the comic and the movie were written by Joe Kelly, so it's pretty true to the original spirit of the adaptation. And the second Alan Moore entry, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is a non-canon what-if scenario that I think is still very well worth exploring. So, I like these stories because I think they get right to what matters about Superman's character. For the Man Who Has Everything is a short little adventure. The episode of Justice League is the one that most people probably most familiar with. I'll basically describe that. Essentially, Superman gets trapped in a dream by a hallucinogenic plant called the Black Mercy, grants him a full immersion experience of his heart's desire, and it is revealed that his heart's desire is a happy, peaceful home life on a not-destroyed Krypton with a wife who suspiciously resembles Lois Lane, and a son. In the comic, the dream isn't actually perfect. It's kind of implied that he's like sort of fighting it the whole time, so there's little bits of it that are going wrong somehow like the whole time. In the cartoon, it's basically the only thing that happens is they're experiencing weird earthquakes that everyone else is like, it's fine, don't worry about it, but he's like, no, there's something wrong here. In his dream, notably, he has no superpowers, no prestige, no fame. He willingly chooses to work on a farm. He even gets a little ribbed at by his dad for not like going into the sciences like Jor-El did. But on some level, he knows it isn't right. He knows it isn't right the whole time. And on the outside, meanwhile, Batman and Wonder Woman are like fighting like crazy to try and stop Mongol from like killing them and just going off to destroy the world, because this whole thing is a scheme by Mongol to take Superman out of commission so he can just destroy the world unopposed.
He's been watching back the tapes of previous Justice League episodes like, okay, I need to not get my ass kicked by Superman. Let's put him in the box.
I could either smack him into a wall at the beginning of the fight, or... So essentially, as Clark, or Kal-El, pieces together in his head that this is wrong, it's heartbreaking because he has a son here. He has a wife. The wife, like, there's parallels to her in the outside world, but this kid doesn't exist. This kid who he loves with all his heart, there's no way he could ever find this kid again. He just doesn't exist. And there's this moment when he and his son are up on the roof and his son's looking through this telescope and is having a great time, where he's just kind of like bent over, like clutching the rail, and you can tell that he knows that he has to leave. And he doesn't want to. And he gives up his beautiful dream, his perfect life, because he has to be Superman. Being Superman is not an act of godly ego stroking. It is a terrible sacrifice. Alan Moore wrote this story, this episode. The theme that being Superman is a sacrifice and a burden is something that Alan Moore loves exploring. He does it in the other story of his that we'll discuss here. And this is noteworthy because Alan Moore wrote Watchmen, which is, on record, I have observed, the favorite comic of everyone who makes a bad Superman adaptation and thinks they're being smart about it. We'll get there.
Yeah, no, that's... Alan Moore is such an interesting example because his work is just so catastrophically, systematically misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because there are two reads, at least, to all the big Alan Moore comics. And the first one is the cynical, uncharitable view, and it's only on the deeper level that you actually get, you know, the honest reading, the straightforward and genuine read. And Watchmen absolutely suffers from the surface cynical response.
I mean, the thing is, Alan Moore has written mainline DC comics. He's written all these characters well. He understands them. He really does get them. He's written some of the most compassionate and heart-wrenching portrayals of Superman in the business. When he writes a story about superheroes that fuck, or like superheroes that kill, he's not saying these are better. He's saying, let's talk about this. You know, we have all these superheroes that are these godlike super beings that are above humanity. Well, what does it do to them psychologically if they put themselves above humanity? You know, that's half the exploration of Watchmen, is just the explicit textual confirmation that all of these superheroes putting themselves above humanity are making the same mistake, thinking they can solve the world's problems without understanding the people who live in it because they think they're better than them. And I think it's very noteworthy that Watchmen does not have a Superman parallel. Dr. Manhattan is a corollary to Captain Atom. He was part of a government experiment involving radiation and became this energy being. It's like explicitly the intent. There is no Superman parallel. You could read this as Alan Moore exploring, what if you had a superhero setting where Superman never existed, where all these people being motivated to become superhero vigilantes did not have this paragon high bar to live up to. But instead, you get people who are like, oh yeah, superheroes that fuck.
Yeah, it's because it isn't like Justice League, but they're dicks. It's Justice League minus Superman plus time, where over time, without the correcting influence of this character, Superman, who is just always upright, always the moral standard, who is constantly sacrificing for the good of everybody else. Even all these other, great superheroes eventually will kind of turn. They won't necessarily go evil, but they will lose touch without someone like Clark to keep them balanced.
It's like it's bad for them. Like Rorschach, he snaps because the horrors he sees are too much for him. The other superheroes, they get disconnected, they get depressed, they have all these really complex issues, because one of the things I think about Watchmen is interesting is that none of these people feel like they like each other. None of them feel like they're friends. And I think that that's something that Justice League, when it's done right, really gets across. Like, these guys, they're Superman and Batman are the best odd couple in DC Comics. They have a great dynamic.
I have to rewatch the whole Justice League cartoons.
Yes.
It's going to take forever, but it's so good.
I know, it's incredible. Every time I revisit it, I'm like, oh yeah.
Still good?
Still good. Especially this episode. The highlight of which I think is interesting. Gosh. It's when Superman and his imaginary son, Van, are on this building as the dream is collapsing around them. Superman at this point knows that this person he is talking to is not real. And I think that a thing that gets brought up a lot in the what if Superman were evil takes is, how could he possibly relate to humans? They're like ants to him, blah, 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 all that stuff. And it's like, even in a setting that he knows is not real, that he knows is not populated by real people, he treats everybody in it with heartbreaking compassion. The fact that he knows that this kid, it would be less painful for him to separate himself and be like, this isn't real, nothing's happening here, it'll be okay, I'm just gonna wake up and get back to business. No, he immerses himself in the fact that essentially his world, his perfect life, and his son are about to die. And he lets himself feel that and stares it in the face rather than turning away from it. Because Superman is so compassionate down to his bones that there was no other option for him.
Yeah, this pairs excellently with also from Justice League Batman and Ace on the swing. This is why they're the best superheroes, these two moments.
Yeah, exactly. This Batman is the most compassionate Batman. He is the best Batman. Yeah. And he set the bar. This Superman, similarly, he doesn't get as many chances to comfort scared kids because in the Justice League cartoon, Superman plays kind of a structural role in the team, which means most of the other characters are the ones that get the dramatic moments. But he's incredibly well characterized.
Yeah, this really does it.
It really does it. To take a quick break from the Alan Mooring before we get back into it, this is a completely different angle on what I think gets to the heart of Superman's character. This was an issue of the comic that then was expanded into an animated movie called Superman vs. the Elite. And this is essentially a very unsubtle analysis of Superman's brand of heroism versus edgy, grimdark, murder is okay, modern 90s anti-hero heroism. Basically, a team of superheroes called the Elite turn up. They're young, they're hip, they think killing's okay. And basically they escalate from being like, hey man, we're just doing what it takes to get things done, to fully declaring war on Superman because he's just refusing to let them get away with hey man,
he's an old fogey who won't let us kill.
Yeah, well, he can't exactly stop them from killing is the problem, but he really doesn't like it, and he's like, you have to stop, and they get butthurt about it. So basically, initially, and the thing is, this is happening in the foreground, the important background is that public opinion is behind the Elite, because when Superman puts Atomic Skull in jail, and then Atomic Skull breaks out and kills a bunch of people, and then the Elite kill Atomic Skull so that he can't kill any more people, this is the kind of thing that gets people being like, wow, with people like these guys around, why do we even need Superman, yada, yada, yada. Obviously, they go fully, they were never on the rails, but it becomes very clear that their thing is not we will only kill these kinds of people. It's we kill bad guys. Guess who gets to decide what bad guys are? That's right, us. So obviously, they declare war on Superman, they fight, he gets bashed around for a while, and what ends up happening is they think they explode him, and it leaves nothing behind but a single tatter of his cape. So none of these whippersnappers ever watched any Dragon Ball, or they know that the big obscuring dust cloud means he's definitely not dead. And what happens is Superman apparently changes his mind and starts playing by their rules. And immediately kills two of them. The other two, the leader and his big guy Muscle, teleport themselves to Earth. They were on the moon, by the way. It doesn't really matter. He won't pull anything with the sheep around. At which point, one of them vanishes in a blur, and Manchester Black says, "Where did he go?" And Superman says, "Orbit." he went into orbit at Mach 7. And then he appears for the first time. We haven't seen him. He's just been a blur until now, but he's been narrating. And fun fact, his voice actor hasn't played many other major characters. The other main one is Sephiroth, villain of Final Fantasy VII.
Oh my god.
So when he goes evil, it's like, wow, no wonder he's so good at this.
Comes down and stabs one of them with a sword.
Yeah, exactly. So he just starts laying into him, and basically the villain, Manchester Black, throws everything he has at him, and Superman's just like monologue, like, I finally bought what you've been selling. Wow, this is great. This is gonna be so easy. And what ends up happening is Manchester Black does like a big psychic beam attack, and it actually hurts Superman. And then Superman does a little heat vision-y thing, and he's like, oh, you're gonna heat vision my face up? You can barely stand. And Superman's like, well, I'm not aiming at your face. And then the TLDR is he uses his heat vision to perform quickie little brain surgery on Manchester Black to get rid of the part of his brain that lets him do all that psychic-y bullshit.
Oh my god, does Superman lobotomize someone here too?
Yes, well, he doesn't he doesn't stop him from using his brain. He just stops him from using that one part of his brain. And he loses his bravado and just breaks down crying, and he's, you're Superman, you don't do this. And Superman's like, you're right, I don't. Everyone's just unconscious. In the comic, it's revealed that he didn't actually fuck with his brain. He just said he did. He just gave him like a minor concussion that'll temporarily stop him from using his powers, and then told him, oh, I totally did brain surgery on you with my mind. The guy's like, oh no.
Yeah.
The bad guys aren't dead. None of the bystanders that looked like they got squished were squished. Superman's army of Superman robots were helping him like sell the illusion. But this is important because, not because it teaches Manchester Black a lesson, but because it teaches everybody watching the lesson of, hey guys, you really, really don't want Superman to start thinking killing is okay, all right? Like, I know you think it would be easier if he just killed some of these bad guys, but trust me, you don't actually want that.
Yeah. And this is an interesting way that Clark chooses to play this, because you mentioned at the beginning, like, some of his early comic runs, like, Superman's kind of like mischievous.
Yep.
He's kind of a bit of a card that it is rare that you see Superman ever lie. But he can be a little sneaky sometimes, and this is one of the rare instances where we get that in later media, because for the most part, the kind of like, oh, Superman's kind of a jokester, like it wasn't one of his characterizations that really stuck for super long, I don't think.
Yeah.
But this is a very interesting iteration of it where he is tactically lying, and Manchester Black would believe that Superman killed those guys because Superman doesn't usually lie.
Yeah.
So if he's like orbit Mach 7, it's like, yeah, no, it checks out.
Yeah, okay, he probably could do that. That doesn't
when
sound
Superman
right.
said it's Morbin time, it was all downhill from there.
Oh no. Yeah, one thing that I really like about this is that the movie overall actually kind of goes out of its way to show that Superman is smart. Like, really quite smart. And one thing that is interesting is that the Elite, they're new at this. They are tactically inexperienced. They are very good at dealing a lot of damage in horrifying ways, but they don't really understand the tactics of doing anything else. So when initially in the movie, when they're still kind of working together before they go full murder's fine and Superman's lame, we're going to kill him, whenever they're having to do any sort of like civilian rescue or anything tactical, Superman is the one calling the shots. Like, okay, we're going to do this. This train tunnel's blocked at both ends and it's under the channel. That's okay. I'm going to use my heat vision to cut channels in the rock, and I'm going to start lifting, and you're going to use your telekinesis to pull, and together we're going to lift this entire train tunnel out from under the river. It'll be great. None of these people would have been able to think of it, and without him, they wouldn't have been able to pull it off.
No.
But the fact is, throughout the movie, it is clear that while they may have power and weird powers, Superman is more experienced, he thinks things through more, and he's more tactical about it. And the fact that in the finale, he uses that to basically be like, everyone says they want me to snap and start killing bad guys. Okay. Let's see what that looks like. And it's just, it's also so cathartic because the Elite are just such little shits. They're so annoying and smug. And Superman is the kind of nice character who basically does not advocate for himself. Like, he'll indulge in a little bit of private angst, but he won't be like, hey, you guys are being real dicks to me, you know that? So sometimes it's nice to see those characters just snap a little bit, even if it's fake.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think it speaks to not only Superman's cleverness, like, he is of course smart, but he's not like the world's greatest detective. He's not the smartest like his superpower isn't his smartness, but his understanding of people is definitely what informs this strategy to play to the palpable fear of seeing a Superman actually, like, you know, take off the chains and go for it. That if he didn't understand how people worked, he wouldn't have been able to make this strategy, you know, play out the way it did.
Exactly.
So in a very meaningful way, he is more compassionate and more understanding of humans than the rest of the elite, who I'd imagine are like actual humans, not, you know, like aliens or something, but are still so detached and possibly, like, you know, up on their own pedestal and, oh, yay, look at us, from their limited time spent superheroing, that they don't necessarily think of other people as, like, people. They kind of see everybody as the ants that they can squish if they decide they're bad.
Yes, absolutely. There could be arguments made that a lot of them had it pretty rough early on, and that gave them sort of a dog-eat-dog world perspective, but they did try to kill humanity's greatest hero for basically no reason, so, like, you know, this is a cool motive, still murder. And one thing I think is interesting, is that the elite's whole deal is very, like, might makes right, and but by the end of the movie, it's kind of clear that they can only really get away with this because people like Superman don't. Because if might makes right, Superman wins. So one other thing that I think is important to note is that just before Superman drops the act, a character who had previously basically told him, kill Atomic Skull, he totally just killed my dad, it's a whole thing, basically runs up and is like, no, Superman, you can't, you have to be better, you have to show us that these ideals matter. And Superman's like, you're so right. And when Manchester says, you know, if you think I'll just go to jail and rot, you're living in a dream world, and Superman's like, good, dreams are very important, you know, it's important to hold these ideals and remember that we can aspire to be better. And if that doesn't just sum up the whole point of Superman and why he's such an important component in the superhero ecosystem, I don't know what does. Because the thing is, you can have superheroes that are darker than Superman. In fact, almost all of them are darker than Superman. That's kind of the point. But if you mess up Superman, he's the bar that everyone else measures themselves against. He has to be as good as he can be, because if he could be any better, he's not setting the bar. So there's a very palpable comparison, that's not the right word, but there's a strong comparison to specifically ancient Greek ideals of heroism, which is not to say that Superman acts like ancient Greek heroes. God, no.
But the idea that if you have power, it is your, you know, great power, great responsibility, but, like, people who have any variety of status in the ancient world and, like, the heroic mythic past were thought to have that because they were deserving of it by great actions and deeds and their own virtue and strength of character.
Right.
We've read The Iliad and the Odyssey. Obviously, that was not the case in practice, but the idea of, like, Superman is a superhero and is also, like, morally the best of us. Like, those two things go hand in hand. And of course, you know, you get great power, great responsibility a million other ways. But Superman, like, he never necessarily needed Uncle Ben to die for it. Like, that was just already in, like, his heart the whole time.
Yep. Yeah, he had to be that good to make it work. And this is not an episode that I have anywhere in the PowerPoint, but one thing that I think also highlights that is there's I want to say two-parter in the Justice League series where in the first part, it looks like Superman is killed. The second part, turns out he's fine.
Oh.
They just flung him like 50,000 years in the future. He's okay. He has a cool adventure and grows a sick-ass beard.
Yeah,
but
does.
while
Doesn't he ride a T-Rex or something?
He doesn't fight a T-Rex, but he does fight a wolf pack, and then, like, harnesses the rest of the wolves to, like, the ruins of the car.
He rides a wolf at the end of the episode. I remember
he forges himself a sword. It's great. It's his perfect aesthetic. But when he is quote unquote dead, there's a funeral. Everybody except Batman, because Batman doesn't believe he's dead. does.
No, not at all. That's right.
Yeah, he doesn't go to the funeral like because he's not dead. He just like scrounges up like 3 tons of stuff from the crime scene to try and figure out what's going on. But he wavers a little bit in the end there. It's pretty great. He has a really heartfelt speech. But while Superman is quote-unquote dead and they do the funeral, Martian Manhunter gives a speech, and one of the lines I remember, 'cause it just stuck with me, is he says, you know, as we remember Kal-El, the immigrant from the stars who taught us all how to be heroes. And it's like, if that ain't the whole deal, like, he really was the first and best, and that's the
Action
point.
Comics page 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that's a good line.
It's so good, and the fact that they let Martian Manhunter do it was ideal, because he's just got such a good voice for it. The highlighting moment I wanted to bring up in Superman vs. the Elite is actually a pretty subtle one. It's before the big fight. It's even before the Elite have declared war on him. They've just started doing bad stuff, and people have started to be like, yeah, the Elite are the best. While he's in the Fortress of Solitude with Lois, who in this movie knows his identity, so that's not a thing, he asks Lois, do you think the world's moved on to a place where I can't follow? And I think that phrasing is extremely important, because it's not, do you think the world doesn't need me anymore? Do you think the world doesn't want me anymore? It's, do you think the world is asking for something that I cannot give them? And that subtly highlights that in the end of the movie, when it's like, oh no, Superman's evil, it's like, no, he would never. He literally can't. He cannot do that. This Superman would never, he's not really envious, and he would never truly consider changing to win over the crowd. He just worries that what the world now wants is something that he can never provide by being what he is. Yeah.
It's a subtle phrasing, but it's an important distinction.
Yeah. I mean, the other highlighting point I was going to do was, there's a really spooky moment when he's pretending to be evil and he just does this evil laugh, and it's great. But then I was watching through the movie and I was like, oh wait, this line is really important actually. So Yeah, and back to Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, back in the hands of Alan Moore. This is a non-canon what-if storyline that presents a possible scenario for the quote-unquote death of Superman. It's framed as a reporter interviewing Lois Lane, who is now Lois Elliott, having married a dude whose last name is Elliott, about what she knows about the disappearance/presumed death of Superman, I want to say 10 years earlier. And the gist is that several of Superman's, joke villains, like Toyman and Bizarro, suddenly up the ante and start straight up murdering people. In the process of all this, his identity gets revealed, his loved ones start getting targeted, the Legion of Superheroes comes from the future just to hang out and to pay their respects. So whatever is happening, Superman's time is running out. And there are a few comic arcs that do what if Superman had 1 year to live, what would he do? I think in one of them he solves world hunger, but that's not really the situation here. It's more like something is going terribly wrong. What do they do? So he basically bundles up everybody who has a connection to Clark Kent who might be targeted, puts him in a Fortress of Solitude. It goes under siege by, all the bad guys, including Lex Luthor, who's being puppeted by Brainiac.
Oh yeah, they also did that in Justice League.
They did.
Time,
this
right?
one's a little more horrifying because Luthor's just coherent enough in there to ask a briefly superpowered Lana Lang to kill him, and she does, but it doesn't stop Brainiac from dragging his body around for a while. Alan Moore goes dark fucking places, man. Superman ends up figuring out, basically it becomes clear, okay, Luthor isn't behind this, Brainiac's not even behind this. Brainiac thought he was destined to win because he's Superman's greatest foe, and it was written in the books that Superman's greatest foe destroys him. So how can he fail here? What the hell? Superman figures out that the true power behind this madness is Mr. McSicklepickle or whatever the fuck, the fifth dimensional reality warper, who basically only ever shows up in a wacky, quirky, I'm causing some mischief and then I'm leaving issue. He can only be banished by being tricked into saying his own name backwards. It's some weird Silver Age bullshit. It's fine. But basically, Alan Moore's take is, do you seriously think a fifth dimensional reality warper would look like a silly little man in a bowler hat? No, man. They're timeless and completely alien. And obviously, they don't have a moral code like humans do. So basically, the gist is that, oh yeah, he takes life at 2,000-year intervals. First 2,000 years, he didn't do anything. Next 2,000 years, he decided to be good. Middle 2,000 years, he decided to be mischievous. Now he's up on next 2,000-year chunk and he's decided to be evil. So all the stuff that's been happening has been this guy, whose name I cannot pronounce, which is the only reason I'm not saying it, just absolutely messing everything up to kill Superman, just for funsies. What ends up happening is Superman grabs the Phantom Zone projector that will drag him into the Phantom Zone and gives him enough time to see that he's aiming for him to summon himself back to his home dimension by saying his name backwards, which means he gets rent between dimensions and fully actually dies. And Superman knew this would happen. He knowingly took a life. And even though Lois is like, you had to, he's like, it doesn't matter. I don't have the right to take a life. Nobody does, especially not Superman. So he walks into his room of gold kryptonite, removes his powers, and Lois never sees Superman again. Her exact words, those are important. This is a lot. This comic is a lot. It goes places that a lot of main canon comics can't go because it's a non-canon what-if scenario. Like, Lana Lang and Jimmy Olsen get murdered, almost all of his villains die. It's a lot. But I think this is interesting because it zeroes in on a very important facet of Superman's personality, which is Superman holds Superman accountable because nobody else can. He has to.
No one else can.
And even in this most, you really had no choice. You absolutely had to. It's like, it doesn't matter. I still killed. I can't be Superman anymore. The highlighting point I want to bring up from this one is basically the very end of the comic, when it is revealed that, surprise, surprise, the man that Lois Lane married is, in fact, the depowered Superman. He changed his name, grew a mustache, and called it a day.
Started wearing a different pair of glasses.
Yeah, exactly. So Superman takes his own powers away, doesn't die like Lois implies. He changes identity, marries Lois, gets the peaceful, normal life he's always dreamed of, and their baby son has inherited his super strength, as shown by a brief little bit where he's just messing with a bit of coal from the fireplace and just drops it back in the thing compressed into a diamond, which is
That's
just
hilarious.
A very brilliant bit of visual storytelling of what's going on. I'll admit the first time I read through it, I didn't get it. I was like, wow, why that?
I definitely wouldn't get it.
Yeah, but it kind of is clear if you read between the lines of them talking to each other, because among other things, when her husband is introduced at the beginning, he kind of sass talks Superman a lot, like, useless old lump, whatever. But then, at this point, he basically says, Superman, he was overrated and too wrapped up in himself. He thought the world couldn't get along without him, which is, I think, a great little indicator of, Superman was torn between, I have my duties to help the world, and, well, I just killed, so I can't be Superman anymore. And, he must have been anxious for a while after he got rid of his powers. But it's like, okay, the world's okay. It has other heroes. It doesn't actually need me, and that's good. And I just think that's a beautiful little moment. I also want to give a quick honorable mention to the Justice League episode where Martian Manhunter comes to Clark's house for the holidays. Because this episode canonizes something that's very important, which is that Clark Kent is the real person and Superman is the persona that he puts on. Because when they're back at the house, Clark, he's just being goofy. He describes the room that John's gonna stay in as nice and cozy, and John's like, nice and cozy. I've never heard you speak this way before. And Clark says, that's why I like coming home for the holidays. I can just relax and be myself. And that just kind of makes it clear that Superman is not the real person like Batman is the real version of Bruce Wayne. Superman is Clark Kent's customer service voice. Superman is what Clark Kent puts on to deal with the stuff he needs to deal with. And I think that's very important because it really drives home Superman doesn't think of himself as this godly higher being. He thinks of himself as Clark Kent, good old boy from Kansas, just doing his part.
That's where the compassion comes from, because he thinks of himself as another human. Even if he's an alien, even if he has this backstory and this emotional baggage, he's Clark.
Yep.
And Superman allows him to exercise his very Clarkian human compassion with the power that, any old person doesn't have.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that this is a very important point to highlight because it kind of undercuts almost all of the easy snark you can throw at Superman, which is like, oh, with that much power, he can't be good. And it's like, he doesn't think of himself that way. He has power, but some people are stronger than average. Some people are really skilled at knitting. Those people aren't like, you are all ants beneath me. He's just doing his best. So I think that these stories, which I consider exemplary of Superman's characters, show some core highlights of his character. Alan Moore's angle is a popular one, that being Superman is a burden and a sacrifice. It's lonely, keeps him from living a peaceful, happy life. He still chooses to use his powers to help people and make the world a better place, power and responsibility style. Superman's devotion to his ideals is his most important trait. If you lose that, he ceases to be Superman. He can lose some of his powers. He can even have episodes where he doesn't have his strength or whatever. He's still Superman. The only thing that makes him Superman is how strictly he holds to his ideals and the fact that he holds himself accountable to holding to those ideals. He will stop himself from being Superman if he goes too far. And it's fairly common to bring up hey, if you have a universe where Superman snaps and kills, that's a character that our Superman goes and beats up until he stops, because that's not how he does things, baby.
Yeah. There is a good episode in season 1 of Supergirl where Kara loses her powers, and it's a similar thing of even without having super strength or whatever, by, in this case, Kara Zor-El's compassion, she's able to solve the problem at the thing that's happening in front of her.
Yeah.
And just like that, Superman is strong and can punch the baddies, but even without his powers, his morals are an inherent, innate part of himself.
Yep. I think, you can have episodes where Superman's depowered by red sunlight or kryptonite or whatever, and he's still doing his thing. And in those episodes, he gets a chance to show off that he's also really smart and very tactical. But like Superman, what makes Superman Superman is not his godlike powers. It has never been his godlike powers, and I think that is very important to note in his character. Additionally, Superman is a tool that Clark Kent uses to make the world a better place. Clark finds this tiring, but a very important duty of his. And Clark Kent does not believe his own hype. He does not believe he's like a god among men. He doesn't believe he's better than anybody. He doesn't believe any of that stuff. He's just a guy doing his best. I think it's very important that Clark does not actually think of himself as this ideal exemplar of hope, showing the world that there is a better way, because he's like, look, somebody has to show the world that there is a better way to do things, but he doesn't think like, this is my sole duty. He just thinks it is a job that he has to show the world that like, you don't need to resort to this kind of violence. You don't need to make yourself judge, jury, and executioner. You don't need to try to make yourself the law. You can make the world better in other ways using the powers that you have.
I also wonder, and maybe I'm about to catch myself in a logical bind here, but if Clark using Superman as the mask allows him to project all of his best qualities onto Superman and leave all of his personal baggage or feelings back with little old Clark, where because Superman is almost, it's him playing a character almost.
Yep.
He can be like all the bravado of like, oh yes, truth, justice, the American way. And even if he does believe that, he's able to say it more confidently because he knows he's acting. I've heard people talk about like getting over stage fright because it's like, oh, you're just playing a character. That's not actually you. You are able to bring everything to it that you want, but it's a little bit flimsy. It's a little bit flexible. So maybe there's something in that of like, because Clark is Clark and he's not Superman, he can make Superman into even more of a paragon than Clark himself is. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting myself caught here, but I wonder if there's maybe something to that idea.
I think that's fair. I think that it's not that Superman or Clark like represses like negative impulses and like puts them in Clark. No. It's not like Clark does what Superman can't. But you do sometimes get bits where like you see little moments where Superman like considers, maybe I will punch through this guy's skull, and then is like, no, I won't do that. And you don't have Clark being like, oh, I would have given him 1-4. No, Clark is a decent guy.
Yeah.
But you do sometimes get him
There's
like
no Golluming.
Yeah. You do kind of get him going back to like the Kent farm and just sort of venting to his parents like, Mom, I'm doing my best, but they're saying I should kill people now and I just don't like that. And she's like, they're just scared. They don't get it. It's okay. You're doing your best. So like Clark Kent has the kind of emotional support network that Superman does not, and I think that's very important. But I think also the fact that Superman is an act that Clark Kent puts on definitely means he can be a little more just easy with it. It's easy for him to say like, we're doing this for justice and stuff, where Clark might have like a snarky reporter comment to make or something like that. But Superman's like, no, we're gonna play this to the hilt. We're gonna go all in with this. We're gonna be completely sincere. So all this to say that Superman is already a massive subversion of expectations.
Yeah.
Everything we think about this guy, half of us are like, if I had godlike powers, you better believe I'd be abusing it. And from then it's easy to kind of project like, thus anybody who had godlike powers would be a jerk about it. Thus this character who has godlike powers, suppose they were a jerk about it. But like, that's not a clever trope subversion. That's the thing played straight. That's what you assume would happen.
Yeah, that's just a villain origin story.
Yeah, that's like, just every bad guy, guys.
That's just bad guys.
What if this all-powerful godlike inhuman being with zero accountability was a jerk? Groundbreaking. Really, guys, it's not that complicated and it's not that clever. I think the fact that because Superman is so sincere, people think that like smacking a little mud on him like makes it cool and smart. Like, I'm doing a clever thing. You all think Superman is cool because you're dorks, but I know the truth. He could be lame if we changed everything about it. It's like, good job, guys. You figured it out.
Yeah. So let's see where people get this all wrong.
Yes. Now, historically, we have a lot of thoughts on omnipotent beings. None of them are particularly optimistic. We all know power corrupts. A lot of us know the Epicurean paradox because of the way they butchered it in Batman v Superman, but that's fine.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we all remember that. And a few writers have volunteered their thoughts on it. The idea of like an Übermensch Superman type who is like just incredibly perfect and unattainably good can be a little frustrating to write, a little bit annoying to work with, especially if it's the only thing, if it's like like the thing that everybody is doing if it's a monoculture. I also had to include this quote from Zack Snyder because I don't really dunk on him that much in this presentation, but I really thought that this quote kind of spoke for itself. Because, like, why would anybody tap this guy to write Superman, for God's sake? The thing is, Superman's boring heroics are a huge subversion of all of this power-corrupting angst. And I think, I don't know if this is true, but I think it's very easy to read into it that Superman is intentionally designed as a huge middle finger subversion to the appropriation of Nietzsche's Übermensch concept that the Nazis got attached to, because they used it to invent that whole master race thing they were all about in supposed opposition to inferior humans.
Yeah, this is also kind of what happened with Captain America, where it's like, yeah, we made the Übermensch, but like, he's ours and he's nice.
Not even, it's not just he's ours, which is definitely the case for Captain America. That was his whole point. But with Superman, suppose you guys are right. Suppose that there is an Übermensch in physical opposition to inferior humans. Well, we've constructed an Übermensch who would save those inferior humans from people like you. Essentially, the Übermensch exists and he hates you. And I think this is important. The fact that it's easy to lose sight of the fact that Superman is a subversion all the way down to his bones because he's been around for 80 years, truth, justice, and the American weighing it up. But, like, he's important, and what he's doing and saying is important because this sort of nihilistic might makes right, might means you don't need to care about people who are weaker than you. All of that is subverted all the way down by basically saying if a person is a good enough person, it doesn't matter how much power they have. It won't corrupt them. They'll just use it for good. It is an incredibly optimistic and idealistic story to tell. And you all know my thoughts on Grimdark at this point. You all know that I'm very suspicious when people are like, optimism is stupid. You should just lie down and rot. Come on, guys. You can have sad stories. It's important to also tell these stories. And I'll get back to that in a bit. Now, the thing is, I understand why this happens because Superman is very interesting, but he also looks very basic. He has a lot of depth, but he's a paragon hero in the most paragon way possible. He's strong, he's brave, he's basically indestructible. He uses those powers to help people far weaker and more helpless than them. If you put Superman in a situation, you basically know what he's going to do. He is going to save as many people as he can, as quickly and as efficiently as he can. That is always what he will do. He's very predictable. And because of his very high power level, he has very few weaknesses, and it is difficult to challenge him in interesting or nuanced ways. There's only so many times you can stick a lump of kryptonite in his face and expect it to be interesting. Challenging Superman is difficult narratively speaking, and this can be difficult to write. A lot of the trouble writers have with him is, you know, if you have a character who can't be hurt and is very strong and can't be stopped, you either take away those things and then throw normal threats at him, or you throw ridiculously high-level threats at him that make him seem pretty useless in comparison. It's the Worf effect. But that said, Superman fills a very important niche in the narrative ecosystem. He's the first and greatest superhero. He set the bar, both in universe and out. Every other hero tries to be what Superman is. Because of that, Superman kind of needs to be a constant point. If we move the point of comparison, everything changes. A lot of people are like, why is the DCEU so miserable? Because Superman is miserable, and he's supposed to be the high point, the brightest colored thing in the frame. If he's miserable, what can any of us do?
The point is that he's the ceiling.
Yes, he's the ceiling.
And if the ceiling is low, then there's nothing and you're stuck.
But because of that, because he's in this, like, elevated position, even by superhero standards, I think it's very easy to lose sight of his personal interest and character traits and the vital role he plays in the superhero ecosystem. If you just kind of rake your eyes over it, you're like, oh, it's Superman. Ugh, he's dull. What if we did something interesting with Superman? And that means writing something that isn't Superman and calling it Superman, and that just throws off the whole, you get narrative trophic cascades. It's a mess. And because of that, I ponder the question, why do we keep letting people who hate Superman tell all the Superman stories? I mean, this isn't exactly a hot take in this day and age, I think. This is a question that I've been pondering in a more broad space than just Superman, and we'll get to that. I have a later slide for all my tangent indulgences. But the fact is, a lot of these, like, what if Superman but evil stories are so clearly written by people who don't like Superman and don't understand the appeal of Superman, as mentioned in that very telling Zack Snyder quote above. I've seen some other interviews from Zack Snyder. He's talked about an interesting angle on Superman, which is that Superman is the dream of Clark Kent. Superman is the dream of this kid from Kansas, which is a good concept that I'd say is corroborated by a lot of stories. The problem is he then goes to Superman was never real, dreams are meaningless, and it's like, no, Superman's important because he's real. But it's, it's fine. He's written more movies than I have. I'm not going to sass him on that. I'm just saying. And I think it's important in this case to unpack a specific binary difference that you can most readily see in the form of satire. And that is satire that's in on the joke versus satire that doesn't get the joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. In on the joke satire, I'd say the satirist understands the appeal of the original story. And I'm saying satire, but this also serves for like reimaginings, deconstructions, even adaptations, all this whole space of sort of transformative media that takes an original story and then does something to it to repackage it in a new direction. In the in on the joke version, the person who's doing that repackaging likes the original story, or at least understands how it works. They get the appeal, they want to explore, poke fun at it from a new angle, they still fully commit to the core principles of the original. This reimagining or satire explores things that the original maybe didn't. It potentially, it adds a little depth, but it never countervails anything that is structurally vital to the original. It doesn't...
Yeah, it's a different angle rather than an inversion.
Right. And there are stories that do essentially say, hey, what if we take this story, but we take these core principles and we get rid of them? Like, I have an example, it's mentioned on a later slide, a comic run called Irredeemable by one of the writers who writes Superman regularly, and the comic run is essentially, it looks like, hey, what if Superman snapped and started killing people one day? You'd think I'd hate it, but what it actually is essentially, what if you have a character who looks like Superman, but it's coming from a very, very different place. There's no human Clark Kent underneath it. It's just somebody who has too many powerful super senses to be able to blot out all the horrible negative things and thoughts anybody around him ever has towards him, and it correspondingly develops a desperate need of love and approval. You know how, like, if you make a piece of art, you can get like 99 positive comments and then one negative one that just sticks in your head for 3 weeks? He's like that, basically.
That.
And all he ever feels is people being ungrateful and expecting the world from him, and it's bad. So that and several other things make him snap. And it's like, that character is not Superman but evil. That character looked like Superman for a while. But the fundamental question was essentially, what if Superman was desperate for validation? That's not a core principle of the original Superman. But it also doesn't exactly violate any core principles of the original Superman because, well, you can unpack it and say Superman does not need external validation. Superman holds himself accountable. But it's like, this is a new thing to add onto the base template and then say, hey, what does this do? And the answer is very bad things, but that's the whole point, to explore that question. I'd still classify this as in-on-the-joke satire because this writer has written Superman before and done a good job. Like, he clearly knows what he's doing. So, on the flip side, you get the other side. Doesn't get its satire. This is a satirist who does not understand the appeal of the original. And in this case, this means basically all of their satire takes the form of, what if this thing was actually as stupid as I think it is? Because in order to satirize something on a deep level, you need a deep understanding of what makes it tick. And if something doesn't work for you, there's only so deep into it you can ever get. This person cannot determine what core principles make the story appealing to those who enjoy it. So their satire or reimagining or adaptation or whatever, it either contradicts or ignores foundational elements that make the original story work, because from the surface they can't tell the difference between something that's just an aesthetic choice and something that's absolutely vital for how the story works. This produces a parody that's surface level and shallow. Yeah,
you get it thinned down to not even the most like basic quality of a thing, but it gets like filed down and compressed down into the surface level trait that the writer doesn't like.
Yep, yeah. It's the parts that make it not work for them. And that makes sense. Again, people don't have to like things, but I feel like asking those people to do an in-depth flip on its head for something that they don't like or understand is just unhelpful to everyone involved. I have two little examples of like an in-on-the-joke style thing versus a doesn't-get-it style thing. They're very small text. I'm not sure if they're going to be legible. The in-on-the-joke example I use is the way that Tolkien plays with various things from Macbeth, just subtly in Lord of the Rings. He's just having a good time with it. But you can tell that when he read through Macbeth, the prophecy of no man of woman born shall harm Macbeth, and, et cetera, until great Burnham wood to high Dunsinane hill shall come against him, which are both supposed to be two impossibilities, no man of woman born, how can a wood march on a hill? And in the play, it's like, oh, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped, and also, hey, we took all these branches and we used them for camouflage, and that's kind of like the wood coming to hide Dunsinane Hill. And you could just tell
Super
Tolkien was
cheating.
making his little marginalia like, that's bullshit. Like, with the first one, he's like, any woman can harm Macbeth, and there's like, I'm a man from his mother's womb untimely ripped, and Macbeth's like, that's just needlessly overcomplicated. And then he's like, what if Great Burnham Wood actually came against him on High Dunsinane Hill? And then you get the Ents storming Saruman's keep.
The trees can walk,
Yeah.
and they fucking hate you.
Yeah, exactly. You bulldoze their friends, they fuck you up very slowly. It makes sense. And that's the kind of, like, it's a loving little bit of affectionate ribbing at a play that he clearly liked and had a good time with. In contrast, for the doesn't get it department, I will classify every story where Batman technically doesn't kill, but does kill. You know? Oh,
Yeah.
he can kill people as long as he hits them with a car. He can kill them as long as he technically just chooses not to save them from a preventable threat, frequently that he caused. It's okay if he mounts a gun on his car and then shoots them with the gun on his car. If it wouldn't hold up in a court of law, I don't know why they use it as an excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is probably the spiciest part of this presentation. I wanted to give an example of two different Superman-alikes, one of which I think gets the joke, the other one I think does not. And those examples are Invincible and The Boys. Now,
Yep.
I will say right out the gate, I have not watched The Boys. I've seen a lot of stuff about The Boys. Nothing made me think it would be worth watching. I don't understand what the point of it is. And I did look up on the wiki. I looked up stuff about this character, Homelander, who is their Superman-alike in the What If Superman Was Evil style. And there was some interesting stuff in the wiki and the comic that they appear to have completely negated and aren't using in the show. So now he's just What If Superman Was Evil, which feels like some wasted potential, but that's fine. So this is as spicy as I'm gonna get. All this criticism is coming from a place of stuff I've heard about the show, stuff I've looked up about the show, not stuff I have seen or immersed myself in because it seems incredibly unpleasant, and I have heard nothing that makes it seem worth engaging with.
For a very brief season 3 spoiler, Homelander tells someone to jump off a building. That's kind of all we need to know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I don't think it's controversial to say, hey, Homelander is like, what if Superman was the worst possible person alive? Like, we know that. But, like, if there's a greater point to it, you know, if, like I mentioned with Irredeemable, like, that's exploring a Superman who's kind of the worst possible person alive, but really what it's doing is unpacking, A, everybody else in the world trying to solve the mystery of why this character would snap, and B, what the hell is going on with his brain and why he's like this. Homelander seems to be about as deep as he appears to be on the surface, which is, what if Superman, but he was a dick? So, but I wanted to bring up Invincible as an example that really surprised me with how good it is, because when you start watching Invincible, it looks like the premise is that Omni-Man, who played by J.K. Simmons, is the Superman-alike. He plays that role. He's a founding member of the essentially Justice League. He looks like him. His costume's got that design. And the focus character is his son, Mark, who learns at the beginning of the series, like, oh, I've got superpowers now. Whoa, this is great. I want to be a superhero just like him. And it looks like it's setting up to be What If Superman Was Evil? And it's not until the final mini arc, essentially the final fight, where Omni-Man reveals to Mark that he is indeed evil. He killed the Justice League parallel. He was sent here as part of like an advanced conquest force. They're supposed to take over the planet and rule it together, and he wants Mark to join him. He wants him to, together we can rule the galaxy as father and son, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes very clear that the premise is not what if Superman is evil, it's what if Superman had an evil dad but was still Superman, because during the course of that fight, it becomes very clear that Mark has the same ironclad principles that Superman does, and this frustrates the hell out of Omni-Man, because he's just like, you can't beat me, they're like ants, it's pointless, you know, he's doing all the standard evil
Look
Superman.
what they need to mimic a fraction of our power.
Exactly, yeah, think Mark.
Because Omni-Man fundamentally has no compassion until the very end when he like flies off into space.
Yeah.
But Mark demonstrates throughout the show that he has the Superman compassion and love for his fellow, you know, people, because he was raised as a person, which is an important aspect of Superman's character, is that even though he is like this extraterrestrial being, he was raised as a human. He grew up with them. He lived with them all this time and understands it because he has the same human perspective and experiences that all of them do.
Yeah, and the fact that it looks like the show is going so gritty and grimdark, it does the thing where, like, if you catch someone falling off a building, but you don't do it right, they might still get hurt. You know, there's collateral damage. Humans are very squishy in this show. it's played for grimdark and horror a lot of the time. And I didn't have very high hopes, but I was very pleasantly surprised by how they did it in the finale, because the answer to the question is, like, what if Superman had an evil dad who did all of the evil Superman points, humans are ants, we're gods, we should rule them, blah, blah, blah. What if that was faced with it? And the answer is, well, it would be very, very gut-wrenchingly unpleasant for him, but he would stick to his principles and fight to save humanity, no matter how outclassed he was, or how much it hurt him, or how many people were killed in the process. He'd keep going. Like, he couldn't be broken. And it was, like, very inspiring in a very painful way. This is not a show I recommend people watch, because it's real heavy, but it really does some very impressive things that I hadn't seen in any other grimdark superhero adaptations.
I think just to use maybe I'm hitting the nail too hard on the head here, but the title of Invincible, of course, like, these guys are pretty much like physically indestructible, but his moral code is also invincible. I'm sure they address that at some point in the show. Again, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I don't usually take myself as being squeamish, but like, I watched some clips of Invincible. Nope, couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is also part of the implication of, like, his morals are unshakable. They don't move. They can't be broken.
Yeah, well, that's part of what is so interesting, because, of course, he calls himself invincible, but pretty much at every turn in the show, it is proven he's really not. Like, he's pretty tough, especially by human standards, but, like, most of the people they're fighting can put a dent in his dad, and he is not that tough yet. So, like, it's funny, you call him invincible, but he spends almost every episode, like, in the hospital, but at the end it's like, okay, yeah, Invincible is not about his body at all. It's not even really about his, like, mental well-being. It's about his indomitable spirit, to a degree that surprises even his dad, the supposed Superman analog. And that I think is a very interesting deconstruction/reconstruction of the Superman archetype.
And I remember you mentioning this when, like, Invincible first came out, it is a deconstruction and reconstruction. You break it down with Omni-Man and you build it back with Mark. And that's the thing, is, like you said, it's not until the end of the season that you realize, Mark is the Superman character. And maybe, maybe it takes a little while for that to become apparent. It's like, he doesn't have a cape, he can't be Superman. But, it deconstructs and then it builds it back. And only by deconstructing can you highlight the, incredible character and valor and upright moral integrity of a character like Mark when being juxtaposed directly to all the worst things that he could be if he was basically completely, like, detached from human reality.
Yeah.
So the comparison is what makes it work.
Exactly, yeah. And a major factor in Mark's arc is that up until that point, he really wants to live up to the potential that his dad is, the ideal that his dad, as far as he knows, is establishing. But Mark is kind of fucking up a lot. He's clumsy. When he flies, he has difficulty. He tries to save people's lives, and they get hit by the collateral and then die in the hospital, and he feels terrible. Like I said, I don't recommend this show to people most of the time. Like, it's really good, but you really don't have to watch it unless you really feel like it. But I think that the fact that they deconstruct evil Superman with Omni-Man and then reconstruct Superman with Mark, it really feels like a very valuable exploration of the Superman story through a familiar enough lens that we're not telling a completely different story. Like, Omni-Man looks like the Superman we recognize. Mark has the actual spirit of the Superman we recognize. Pit them against each other and some crazy shit goes down. It's a very interesting show that's doing a lot of interesting stuff. In contrast, again, with the caveat, all my shit talking is coming from a place of haven't watched the show, never will, don't want to. Whatever the boys may be doing that is interesting, none of it is in the character of Homelander. He seems like the most basic bitch on the planet. It dares to ask the question, what if Superman was a narcissistic, sadistic, megalomaniacal sociopath with a milk fetish who thought of humans as lesser beings and used his godlike powers to commit whatever murders and atrocities he wanted under the thinnest veneer of good publicity? Would that be fucked up or what? The answer is obviously yes. There's nothing deeper there. Again, this is like you take the base character and then you remove all the things that make it tick, and you're like, hey, wouldn't it be fucked up if that happened? It's like, good, yes, it would. Congrats.
Yeah, it's the purest cynical reading, kind of in the vein of like I was mentioning earlier, like the surface level Alan Moore reading is like, oh wow, all these people are awful.
Yep.
It appears to me, and again, I also haven't watched The Boys. I've gotten a lot of like secondhand, like plot spoilers and stuff from just general like online existing.
Yep,
but
yeah.
It is a purely cynical, corporatized superheroes are just the worst all the time. And I understand that there is a market for that, clearly.
Yeah.
But it's just generally disappointing
Yeah.
that even if these characters have traumas and even if they are awful people for, broken homes or like whatever the reasons may be, it is fundamentally unsatisfying to watch a story that is not it's not a tragedy and everyone's terrible. Like, sure, bad things happen to some of these characters, like, stuff goes wrong.
Yeah.
You have to deal with things, but it's just like misery porn. That's the point.
As far as I can tell, the point of The Boys, and just so you all know where my head was at when I was doing this, I literally Googled, what is the point of The Boys? I got no answer. But as far as I can tell, it is about celebrity culture, and it is about corporatization, and how hero worship and stuff like that is bad. I think that perhaps their point is not helped by the fact that this character who, I'm sure there are more interesting other characters that are explored. This is the guy whose face I see everywhere, clearly by design. He's supposed to look like Superman. He's clearly supposed to be the poster boy for all the shit that's going wrong in this show. He's just so blandly terrible. I don't know. I don't feel super comfortable going super hard criticizing a show that I haven't watched and will not watch, because I know if I go too hard sassing it, all anyone's gonna comment is, oh, you gotta give it a chance. It just seems so relentlessly unpleasant. I've heard nothing about this that makes me think it's worth me specifically watching. I'm not particularly impressed with misery porn. I already know celebrity culture is bad. I think I'm good. So
I think it's unfortunate that the very valid points about celebrity culture are played secondarily to superheroes being dicks.
Yep.
I feel like the point would be better served by not having superheroes in the main role.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
I mean,
maybe that's my take.
And also,
I think we can move on from this. We're probably
I did want to say just
the ends
really
of our-
quick
yeah.
that I did try to look up like which of the writers that write like evil Superman stories are ones that have worked on Superman before, which are the ones that have had like interesting insights in the character. And all I found with this was the creators were told like, do you think Superman or Homelander would win in a fight? And they were like, oh, totally Homelander, man. He hits below the belt. And it's like, oh yeah, that's Superman's problem. He doesn't fight brutal enough. We've been there, folks. Anyway, I do want to make it very clear that Superman's story is not for everybody. That's completely fine. No story is for everybody. His particular brand of goodness and righteousness can indeed seem boring or unrealistic or unrelatable, generally not one's cup of tea. You don't need to find the funny spaceman flying around in spandex compelling. It's fine, actually. Does not mean that Superman should not exist, and it does not mean that Superman's idealistic narrative must be changed or grimdarked up to appeal to an audience. There's a difference between this story's not for me and this story is not worth telling and shouldn't exist.
Yeah. I think the timing of Superman's creation is relevant because 1938, things were going bad.
Yep.
People saw the writing on the wall that things were going to get worse, and the idea of a character who can do anything and chooses to be good just because it makes them feel warm and fuzzy on the inside is such a potent concept for a character that I think is probably needed now more than it has been in a while.
Yeah.
It's like there's enough awful things happening every day, all the time, everywhere, that maybe it's okay to just have a character who's good, and the whole point is that they can do anything and choose to be good every time, no matter what. They always make the choice, and sometimes maybe they can't do everything, but they always choose to do the right thing. That is an aspirational model for us to remind us that humans can actually get it right sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 1938 and you're like, oh man, I wonder if they're going to invade Poland next year. But people can still be good.
Yeah.
In spite of that, there is still goodness in the world, and it can come from, middle of nowhere Kansas, that, greatness from small beginnings, Uncharted, Sic Parvis Magna, whatever. But like, even in a very awful world that we're living in right now, where a lot of things feel like they're going wrong, any one person can still just choose to do the right thing. Like, even if you're mild-mannered little Clark Kent, like you can put on a mask and you can step outside of yourself and do something that maybe your normal you wouldn't. You can choose to kind of like puff out your chest a little bit and do something that's, brave and maybe a little bit scary, but is the right thing to do.
Yeah, even if you're not a god from space.
That's aspirational for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's wildly different, but I think this is a lot of why Everything Everywhere All at Once resonated with so many people, because its core moral was, even if nothing matters, we can still always choose to be kind. And that's always true. It costs you nothing. You can just always choose to be kind and good. And I think that stories like that are extremely important. I won't even say now more than ever. I think to say that we have it worse now than they had it in 1938 is a little bit dubious. The fact is, things have always had the potential to be bad. Things have always had the potential to be good. Things have at every point in history had at least 5 major storms going on at once. Bad things have happened, and that's just a fact of life and our experience in it. And if we accept that that is the only way reality can be, we hold nobody accountable for making things worse. But if we accept that things can be better and made better, and that people can be good and do the right thing, then when people don't do that, we remember to call them out on their shit and, hold them accountable and make them experience consequences for their actions. It is very important not to buy the lie that reality is unilaterally terrible and everyone is evil secretly and everybody given an ounce of power would use it for evil. Because if we believe that, we let the worst people in the world get away with doing terrible things because we treat that as what we expect. We have to expect better, or we can't get mad when people do worse.
Yeah. Because if being awful is par for the course, it's like, business is business.
But no, so you gotta remember, you gotta have standards, man. You gotta hold the world accountable for what it does. Well, I do want to say that, like, as a corollary, just as I say Superman stories should exist, I am not going to say that grimdark What If Superman Was Evil stories have no right to exist. Just because I personally think they're much too impressed with themselves doesn't mean they don't deserve to exist or to have the audience that they have. Some people get a lot out of them. I've seen your posts. I get it. It's fine. And there are What If Superman Was Evil stories that are written by authors who do like Superman. As mentioned, Mark Waid's comic Irredeemable does that exact thing. These are writers who understand how they can write Superman and choose to write a character who looks like Superman and has some superficial similarities to Superman, but some key differences, and then explore how those key differences make them not Superman, which is different from taking stories that say, hey, what if we took Superman and then we f***ed him up?
Just grime him up a little bit.
Yeah, make him worse. Let him kill people on day one. Let him smash up that entire city. That's great. I said I wasn't going to sass.
The experience of reading some, what I'll call good faith Superman satires, where it's like, they're in on the joke.
Yeah.
It can have the same experience as, like, kind of an ice bath type thing where, like, it's different. It's a shock all at once and it jolts you and it can make you think about it and think like, I can see by contrast, like, this is very much not Superman and I can appreciate the actual Superman more. Again, it's the Invincible Omni-Man comparison.
Exactly, yeah.
In a similar way, I feel like just reading, like, an honest to goodness regular Superman story or, like, watching the Justice League cartoon or whatever is similarly, like, it can have that kind of ice bath quality where it wakes you up to, like, oh my god, like, this is what true goodness can look like. This is an example of just pure, unselfish virtue.
Yeah.
For the betterment of everybody else. And that's what that looks like. Yeah, because it is so rare that we see that in the world. And we see a lot of small ways that virtue can have positive impacts. And we see, the little acts of kindness that people do. But as just a demonstration of pure goodness with someone who has the power to do everything good that they want and goes and does it, that is refreshing and cathartic. And I find quite relaxing, not necessarily relaxing, but it's comforting to read stories like that. So that's why I personally enjoy a lot of the Superman narratives that we are lucky enough to have. And I think there is a similar benefit to reading a good Superman satire, but less so than just reading good Superman.
I think good Superman satire needs to serve a purpose. When I say that, I don't mean it shouldn't exist if it doesn't have a purpose. Again, I'm not making any statements on what art should and shouldn't exist. Every piece of art has an audience that would benefit from seeing it. I'm not here to police that. I'm just here to complain. But I think that when you have, like, hey, what if we'd made Superman evil? Like, it really helps if there's a point you're going at there. Like, what if we took a character who looked like Superman, but he got this way from a completely different direction? Or, there are also all those stories, like Red Sun, where it's like, what if Superman's origin was different? Like, would he still wind up as Superman? Were Ma and Pa Kent the catalyst, or was it something else? What makes him the way he is. And I think all these explorations exist because Superman is such an open book. He really is what he appears to be on the surface. He is not complicated. If he has hidden depths, they don't go down very far. He's not dumb and he's not shallow, but he is simple. I've said this before. One of my favorite ways to describe paragons is from the Discworld. A character who is very similar is described as simple in the way a sword is simple. Very, very good at doing what it does. Not very complicated, but extremely effective. My main thing is I just don't understand why people who don't like Superman keep getting forced to make movies and stuff about him. It's like, you don't have to, guys. It's okay. You can leave this to somebody who actually likes this.
Surely there are other characters that this would work for.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, making, hey, this character's just like Superman but evil, like, I can get in a twist about that, but there's only so mad I can get. But when they take my boy and then they mess him up, I'm like, guys, there are so many interesting things you could do with this character, and the fact that you can't see that does not inspire confidence. And I did want to go on a brief little, like, just let us go off on some tangents, because that thing about, like, satire that gets the joke versus satire that doesn't, or beyond satire, you know, adaptation, reimagining, this extends well beyond Superman. This extends into all kinds of different stories, and I just thought it could be fun to maybe real quick talk about some of those. The first one is about Batman, because I had to.
Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as mentioned as before, like, any version where it's like, it's okay that Batman kills because he did it with a car is like, okay, so you don't understand why Batman doesn't kill. You think it's okay as long as he doesn't fire a gun with his own hand. That kind of betrays just a fundamental lack of understanding of what makes Batman such an interesting paragon of moral integrity. And my favorite go-to punching bag for that is the Nolan Batman movies, which I watched for the first time recently enough to not at all be impressed with them by nostalgia. They are desperately embarrassed to be about Batman. It's so obvious. They want to be about a cool, suave bazillionaire who has a suit of cool bulletproof armor and punches the disenfranchised with it.
I actually think the second movie with the line of, like, what makes you better than us, and Batman says,
I'm not wearing hockey pads. Yeah.
It's played as a joke, but I think it is telling that the movie thinks the difference between some guys who dress up in hockey pads and Batman is that Batman can pay for better kit.
Yeah. It's the old, what's your superpower? I'm rich. No, it's not. It's his iron will, damn it. Everybody knows that. Whatever. Yeah, the Nolan Batman movies treat this whole Batman thing as like a dress-up game played by Bruce Wayne so that the cops can't come after him for his crimes, which is also what they did in Amazing Spider-Man, by the way. There's a Cosmonaut Variety Hour about that, where he just talks about, like, he makes the Spider-Man suit so that the cops don't arrest him for his crimes, and I was like, God, I forgot that part. Everything else about that movie was so bad too. Anyway, the Nolan Batman movies, they don't want to be about Batman. And by the time that Nolan actually read any comics, which is when he made the third one, he tried including a few more Batman-y things, like the dumb bomb threat and Bane and stuff like that. The Breaking the Bat arc, all that stuff.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the good
That's
stuff.
the only Bane voice I'm going to get. I'm a white boy. I had to. I'm sorry.
Boy. But this is one I would classify as an adaptation or a reimagining that does not understand the point of the original. It gets the surface level. This is a billionaire who dresses up like a bat and punches the disenfranchised. Woo! So it does that. It's like, he doesn't kill. And it's like, okay, he doesn't kill, but I don't have to save you either. And it's like, no, he does actually. He really does. I'm sorry.
To be charitable to the Nolan movies, they started off as crime movies with Batman in them rather than Batman movies about the criminal underworld. I can only give that as the most charitable interpretation that I have on them. I think, like, the performances are good for all the reasons that people, like, you know, really like to like the second one. Like, yeah, no, good. But Batman is not ever the focus of that movie. It's all about the villains in those ones. Batman is a side character in his own movie.
And now that we've seen The Batman and can see what a good Batman movie looks like, it's like, wow, you could have done this well, but you didn't. Another example that's not a superhero, but Indigo kind of insisted I bring this up. The Tom Hooper movie musicals. For a more in-depth explanation of this, Sideways has couple videos about this, about the music in Les Mis and the music in Cats specifically, why the music in these musicals sucks so bad. Because Tom Hooper as a director is very impressed with the possibility of making the music bad in creative ways, like making everyone do it in one take 12 times over, day of shoot, while dehydrated.
That's rough.
Yeah, in many ways. Because it's like, what is the point of a musical? The music. Like, if you're seeing it on stage, it's also the stagecraft and the theater and stuff like that. But like, ultimately, it's the music. You listen to the soundtrack on YouTube. You watch the slime tutorial that's secretly the pirated version. Everybody knows it, okay? So why would you take a movie musical and make the music not good for the sake of realism? Like, nobody's listening to the original soundtrack of the Les Mis movie because they'd have to listen to Russell Crowe.
It would feel more authentic if these sad French people, like, clearly hadn't drank water in, like, 4 days.
Yeah, you know what would really make this, like, 12-part harmony in One Day More better? Recording everybody in separate takes with no click track. Anyway, so I never used to have strong opinions about click tracks. This is Sideways' fault. I highly recommend the channel.
Big ups to Sideways for hot click track takes. Well, no, it's not even a hot take. That's just the truth.
Yeah. How is that hey, we're going to do a musical, but we're not going to give them the rhythm they need to sing to because it's more authentic. In the real world,
sound
people
off
don't
on
have
your click
tracks.
track opinions in the comments.
Hey, you know what also isn't realistic? People singing randomly. It's like, look, everybody knows that. Every Disney movie in the last 10 years has made that joke because they're also desperately insecure. But the point is, like, we already get that the music doesn't make sense. You can at least make it also sound nice. Also, I wanted to take a little opportunity to just yell at Sherlock a little bit more because, again, in terms of, like, this is an adaptation that gets the surface and then nothing deeper. A series that is allegedly about a genius detective solving mysteries that turns into just being about a genius because he doesn't solve very many mysteries and he doesn't do any detectiving. It's mostly about him being a dick to the people who still put up with him. And that's just not fun to watch. You guys seen that meme where it's like the 10 worst episodes of Sherlock, and it's like he only got 13 episodes, bud.
I think it definitely got worse in later seasons as they tried to lean in more to, like, Sherlock is, like, tormented, whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to harp because, like, Benedict Cumberbatch did a great job with what he was given. And I mean, this was, like, my first introduction to it, but I thought, like, seasons 1 and 2 were super cool.
Yep.
It was only season 3 when I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Hold
Wait
on.
a minute.
Hold on.
But
Sirens going off.
There's a validity to, like, let's take a different approach. Let's play with it a little bit, see what we get, see where this goes. And that's valid. That's, like, the whole point of remixing stories and thinking, well, let's play with it. What aspects of these characters are immutable? What can we change? What happens? Like, that's the experimentation that keeps a character going since the 1800s.
Yeah.
You gotta play with it or else he's gonna get stale.
Yeah.
Granted.
Yeah.
Granted. But the commitment to making a character the hero by virtue of them being a dick and, like, wow, look at how much everyone still puts up with them despite the fact that they're a dick.
Yep.
I feel like that's the whole point of Rick and Morty as well. I think is interestingly undercut with Elementary, which was the less popular of the two Sherlock shows from the 2010s. I watched parts of it as Cyan was doing her full series watch through earlier this year, where he's a guy who has difficulties, he has problems, but beneath everything, he still abundantly cares about the people around him, and you do not have to dig far to get that. Even if he puts up a facade, that's only the facade. That's not the real guy. The real Sherlock in Sherlock is a dick. The real Sherlock in Elementary cares deeply about the people around him and the people who he's helping in his cases.
That's an easy thing to overlook if you only know Sherlock Holmes from, like, the modern adaptations, is that Sherlock Holmes is a very kind person. A lot of the people he helps in the original stories are, like, young women or, like, widowers, other people that society has not helped and the police will not listen to. Like,
by far the most vulnerable.
Yeah, the most vulnerable people. Like, they go to him because they need his help, because they are desperate and nobody else is there for them. Like, sometimes it's kings, sometimes it's a girl from an abusive household who's worried that her father is trying to kill her. And Holmes listens to the girl a lot more compassionately than the king, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is a read that A, doesn't understand the appeal of the character of Sherlock Holmes. It's like, yes, he is a genius, but he's fun to watch because he's also just this eccentric goober who's like Watson's disaster roommate who like deletes important astrological information from his brain to make room for more cases and microdoses on cocaine on the weekends to keep his clearly visible ADHD in check. And also misses that the point of the stories is that it's interesting watching these mysteries unravel and like seeing how they actually get pieced together through, at the time, like cutting edge forensic techniques and stuff that turned out to be pseudoscience but was still very cool to watch. Like, that's the fun part, the mystery solving. And there's some videos about this, about why when Sherlock stopped being about solving mysteries in episode 2, it kind of stopped being so fun to watch. Anyway, all this to say, there are many, many examples of situations where a story is reimagined or adapted or satirized by somebody who doesn't seem to like, understand, or have ever really critically analyzed the original in any way. And they end up being very obvious.
Yeah, I think with all these examples, with Superman, with Batman, with movie musicals, with Sherlock, I think I will just highlight that we're not dunking on the concept of like satirizing a character. We're specifically going out of our way to be like, here is an example that understood it, that played with the source material, that said something new, and made a point with how they changed the character, even if they kind of gruff him up a little bit. Like, you know, Sherlock in Elementary is a kind of, he's a down on his luck guy. He's got rough edges to his character. But compare that to Homelander, compare that to Nolan Batman, compare that, well, not even Nolan Batman, but compare that to like the Tom Hooper stuff, compare that to Sherlock from Sherlock, where it's just, oh, what if they sucked?
Yeah, that's really it.
Maybe there's something else buried under it, but the point of the story is, oh, wouldn't it be cool if they sucked?
Yeah.
It's so just disheartening to deal with a character who has very little ethos beyond just being obnoxious and being tolerated by the rest of the cast anyway.
Yep.
It's like, is it really that unbelievable that like a character can be nice and care about other humans? Yeah. And the general tone of all of these adaptations is, look how silly it is to care.
That's really
and
it.
That's the biggest indictment I can give to the adaptations that don't treat these characters as compassionate people, is like, it belies a very, very jaded and cynical perspective on humanity. Like, oh yeah, you know, like what an idiot, being vulnerable and having feelings, caring about other people. Better to fortress up and be a dick to everyone so they can't hurt you, you know. And granted, a lot of these characters in the, you know, mean adaptations have complexity. They still do have complexity.
Yeah.
But the surface presentation is like, but they suck, and that's just disappointing.
I think it's actually really interesting that you made that connection, because the angle I was mostly taking is essentially just the very technical, like, if you don't understand what you're deconstructing, you can't write a deconstruction of it by its very nature. You need to understand what makes it tick in order to take it apart. But the thing that you pointed out about, like, these stories almost uniformly have this oddly, like, mean-spirited, jaded, what an idiot caring attitude. I think that exists in both a Doyleist and a Watsonian context. In story, what an idiot caring. These characters don't care, and anyone who thinks they care is stupid. And on a meta level, who would care about this story? I don't understand the appeal of it. It's very silly and weird, and thus by extension, any story I tell about it will punish you for caring. And that really does feel like a lot of what kind of bugs me about this, because some of these stories come from a place of, like, potentially misplaced caring. Like, I don't think anyone can accuse Tom Hooper of not caring about the musicals he's trying to adapt. I just don't understand what he's getting out of them if it's not the music. And the question of, essentially, if you don't care about the story, why would you take it apart and try and put it back together, or satirize it, or adapt it, or tell a story with it? Like, if you don't care, why are you doing it? And in contrast, you can really tell when a story is being told by somebody who cares. The caring just kind of leaks out of it because they care so much. They commit to the bits. They let the characters and the creators care about what they're doing. And when they don't do that, you get something that's just kind of shallow and really just makes it seem like the creator doesn't really understand what they're talking about. And the thing is, even if the creator does understand, even if they have at times, like, written other versions of this character or more intriguing explorations, it can still make it seem like they are punishing you for caring. I mean, I think that Watchmen is a very interesting story, but I think that there is a reason that so many people who love it get this completely erroneous message out of it that Alan Moore did not intend. There's something in the way it's written that makes it seem like it's punishing you for caring.
Watchmen's intended as a tragedy, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And maybe I'm just repeating myself at this point, but there is something in reading a story about a character who just in their bones cares about everybody else that is reassuring on a deep level, where it's like, yeah, you know, maybe there's some nonsense going on, but I can see this person caring, and imagine them, you know, if they were a real person caring about, you know, someone I know, or caring about someone like me, or, you know, caring about someone that, you know, society isn't able to care for and take care of. That it's just reassuring, because humans root for each other intrinsically all the time. It's in like our blood, it's in our thoughts, it's in everything we do, is we want to root for each other.
Yeah.
That seeing a piece of media or a story that negates that and rejects that feels inhuman.
It also,
which is why I hate it so
yeah,
much.
I couldn't tell. But yeah, I mean, also, you know, humans also learn by example. When we see somebody caring that deeply, it gives us permission to do the same. And speaking from experience, as somebody who has spent most of my life caring very, very deeply and strongly about a lot of things I can't change and can't control, to a degree that I frequently got made fun of for, you often get hurt for caring, and that makes it tempting to stop or to redirect it into self-pitying or harmful directions. And being shown examples of people who did care that fiercely, that strongly, that openly, and kept going even if it hurt, can sort of give you a degree of just the resilience to hold on to this fundamentally very important and good part of you, rather than letting it shrivel up or hide in progressively smaller corners of you to avoid getting hurt by it.
Yeah. Compassion creates an internal fortitude that is very difficult to shake, even though the surface reading is that, oh, you know, if you like something, it's just fodder for someone else to make fun of you.
Yeah.
I mean, we all had the thing we liked as a kid that we got made fun of. It's like, oh, you know, caring just gets you hurt. No, these heroes show that caring is a source of strength. It is usually the source of their strength.
Yeah.
It's the whole point.
I will also say that, like, when I started doing trope talks, it took me, like, a serious mental hoist to be willing to admit out loud some of those shows that I liked and watched. But afterwards, I was like, yeah, I'm glad I did that. And I have seen some people be like, oh, I can openly admit this thing I like that I get made fun of, or, you know, stuff like that. And it's just, it is very important that people have examples of people just being open and honest about how much they care about stuff and people, and because that's very, very important and good for you, and shoveling that away is bad, and hurting people for caring is one of the worst things you can do to them. Supporting people who are caring and open about that stuff is one of the best things you can do, because it gives them the resilience they need to keep caring, even though it does hurt, and it does open you up to that kind of thing, but it's much better than the alternative. This is just paraphrasing a speech Katara gave at some point. I can't believe an episode about Superman got kind of soapboxy. Anyway, all that to say, the TLDR, everyone who says Watchmen's a real good comic, Watchmen is good, but please read another comic before you write any more superhero movies. Anyway.
Superman can fuck and still care about humanity. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Superman hangs out with some superheroes that kill, okay? It's not that special. Wonder Woman kills on the regs and nobody thinks that's weird.
Yeah.
Oy.
The whole point of Captain America is that he wanted to kill.
Father, I hunger for blood.
Okay,
good man. Anyway.
Yeah, I think there is clearly much more that we could even continue saying long into the night.
Yeah. But I think instead I'll go and rewatch all of Justice League.
I think that would be our recommended reading. Not a homework assignment, but go watch Justice League to see how Superman, as a moral paragon, as a leader who does not have the capacity to do harm to another person, even like he can't even kill the enemies, like he can't it's not in him to do that. To see how that person makes everybody around him better.
What I actually do recommend,
go watch Justice League.
I do recommend watching Justice League. I actually recommend taking a slightly more critical attitude, not bad attitude, but like there are some episodes where he is really on point, and there are some episodes where his role in the team almost sort of supersedes his internal incorruptible paragonness, not because he does anything bad, but because the role that they sort of give him in the team is Superman flies off the handle sometimes, especially when his own bad guys are in play. When it's Lex Luthor or Darkseid or Brainiac, Superman tends to go a little bit rogue and leave Batman and the others chasing after him to clean everything up. And this is an interesting part of his character that I don't necessarily approve of. But if you're looking at it episode by episode and seeing, okay, which of these episodes does he feel most like Superman? What does he do that makes him feel really Superman-y? And where does it feel not quite right? I think this is just a very fun way to sort of unpack the parts of his characters that get overlooked and the parts of him that work for you. For instance, there's an episode of Justice League that I categorically refuse to rewatch. It's called Clash. In it, Superman is manipulated by Lex Luthor into fighting Captain Marvel because basically Lex Luthor builds a housing development and puts a thing under it that looks a lot like a bomb on X-ray vision and essentially just does it to mess up Superman's public image. And I find it immensely frustrating because Superman probably shouldn't be that stupid. But again, like, this is the kind of thing that we analyze, you know? We look at stories that get these characters in a way that we think is correct, and we look at stories that don't quite get them, and we try and piece together what we see that makes them tick, what's important about them, and what can fluctuate from story to story. But also just rewatch the show, it's really good.
It's good. So,
bye! Woo!